Morning, everyone. Just give a few more moments for the attendees to trickle in. Zoom sometimes takes a little bit of time here, so give it half a minute or so, and then we'll crack on. Perfect. So we start there. There might be some people still trickling in a little bit late, but we will yeah, just crack on, and they can obviously watch the recording afterwards. So thank you for joining today. My name is Matt, Head of Growth EMEA at Fathom. It's the third of 5 webinars I'm running this week with a more of a practical kind of slant. It's not going to be kind of full product demos or anything. It's going to be kind of very specific things with some tactics for you to hopefully implement at your firm or in your business after the end of the webinar. So today's topic will be utilizing Fathom's business roadmap to help supercharge your finance meetings. So whether that's a client meeting, or whether you're an in-house accountant or a founder, you can use the tips and tactics today to help gain more insights, essentially. A couple of things just before we get started. So this will be recorded. There's also a practical PDF that will be sent out afterwards as well. So everyone who's attended will receive that too. I'm not sure when that will go out, to be honest. It'll be later on this week or maybe early next week. I'm going to have to just coordinate with my marketing team on that to make sure everyone gets what they need. If you have any questions, use the Q&A. I've got on a separate screen here. I keep ducking over to see if anyone's asked anything. But if anything does come up, please do use that. And I'll get to it either when I see it or towards the end. So I typically won't go for the full 45 minutes of the allocated time today. Cool, let's get to it. So quick agenda. So going to go over why I see this as important. There'll be a little bit of a time for reflection. So a couple of questions for you to jot down on a piece of paper or a Google Doc or however you take your notes to see where you're currently at or how you can maybe implement this for a specific client or for your business. Then there'll be a bit of a in-product application. So I'll show you the business roadmap and there'll also be some tactics and then some actions off the back of it. Let me just try and spin up a poll here. So just before we get into the kind of the topic a bit more detail today, there's going to be just a couple quick questions that I'm going to launch in a poll. So if you are so inclined, please do answer. There's 4 quick questions, multiple choice. Always good to know kind of where people are at on the journey for those who have joined the webinar today. So that poll is now live. In the meantime, I will continue through a few slides. So please get in touch. This is a slightly different format, this kind of webinar week series that I'm running to the other ones that we've done at Fathom. So we do quite a lot of thought leadership ones, which is great to hear from existing accountants and business owners and how they kind of tackle X, Y, or Z, and they can share their kind of war stories, as it were. This one's a little bit more practical, so it's just me today, unfortunately. We're going to go over some tactics that you can hopefully implement. So if you have any questions, on it, whether that's kind of Fathom or just in general, the content I'm covering off, please do email me. And again, if you have any feedback, kind of positive or negative, feed that through as well, because I want to try and work out what we should be doing more of as a team next year. There'll be a poll at the end as well, covering off some of that too. Rules of engagement. So there's going to be no product demo kind of end to end. There's a time and place for your product demo, but I think most webinars are not it, to be honest. We usually tailor them at Fathom anyway to your specific firm or your specific business, so it doesn't really make sense to do it en masse. Get involved. So yeah, please do ask questions if you have questions. Do really try to use the time to reflect. I mean, if you don't want to, of course, you don't have to. I can't force you to. You can go make a coffee if you prefer, but definitely try and get involved because you've kind of dedicated the time here to listen to this, to try and get some outcomes from it. Basically provide me with some feedback, so if it's good, bad, indifferent, and also take actions at the end. There'll be a little bit of time for you to to write down what actions you can take from this today. So why is scenario planning and kind of business roadmap, why do I see that as important? So Depending on, of course, whether you're an accountant or a business owner, this webinar has a mix of both on it. So you get more insight that's applicable to both, of course. So you can forward plan, you can scenario plan. So having your kind of historicals is obviously super important. You can see how you've gone in terms of your, like your balance sheet, your profit and loss, etc., how much cash is in the bank currently. But forward planning is really important. You know, what do you need to do to pay that dividend? Can you afford to hire that staff member? Should you expand, the cafe to have that extension, for instance? All these sorts of insights add a lot more value, which obviously now splitting into the second bucket there. But you can also have different scenarios. So, here are, 7 options maybe you model out, and you can say in a board meeting, these are the 7 options with a super, super clear fan chart that will tell you the outcome on a specific metric across those 7. So you can really visualize it, and it helps the, your stakeholders or your clients really see the value and understand why they should be taking that particular option rather than just some kind of forecast. So it's like, right, we're going to say 3% month on month forevermore. That's okay, but it's probably not quite as realistic as one that's a bit more detailed. More values. Again, you're helping guiding the business. You're also having like actionable discussions during these meetings. So it's not just like, okay, great, the quick ratio was that. It's more like, oh, actually, how do we get to that point? How do we increase that? Should we pay the dividend in April, or should we try and push it back to June? What makes the most sense? So you can start to have these sorts of tactical discussions and really become that kind of, again, trusted advisor. If you're an accountant or if you're in-house, kind of make those key decisions, which is the name of the game for any analytics tool, in my opinion. And also more fees if you're on the accounting side and you're doing this with a client. It helps with client retention. And again, it can be a USP because you're not just doing a generic kind of report from like a core accounting software. You've got this more comprehensive offering that can help them really guide and drive their business to whatever their eventual end goals are. Well, I'm just going to quickly look at the polls here. So some interesting answers. I'll just end the poll and share the results there. But looks like most people forecast, about 3 out of 4. Most people scenario plan. Updates are annually, never quarterly or monthly. And you forecast and Fathom about 50-50. A couple more no's than yeses, which is interesting. So I share the results there. You can see how you compare to your peers on the call. So time to reflect. So kind of write down 3 scenarios that you think could happen in the next 12 to 24 months. So things I'm thinking of here. So if you're an accountant, pick a specific client for this. Things I'm thinking of here are things like, hiring a few people, or maybe they're doing like a fundraise, or opening up a new office, or launching a new product line, like whatever it is. Write down 3 scenarios that you think could happen for the same client, or if you're in-house for your business, and you can aggregate little mini events into these. Second one is, how do you currently model out these scenarios? So, it looks like almost half of you use Fathom forecasting. So, I mean, hopefully the answer is Fathom. But if it's not, how do you model that out? And I guess why do you not use Fathom for that if you kind of have that current subscription? And then put pros and cons to the current approach. So what's going really well with that approach, and what could perhaps be better? And then out of 10, score your current forecasting. So if you're, again, an accountant in practice, you can do this as like a service offering. So how well do you think you do this as a team, from marketing to delivery to kind of regular review? If you're in-house, just kind of your regular forecasting, how well do you think it is? Not necessarily always in terms of accuracy, more in terms of like getting the output and facilitating those discussions. So give a minute or two just to jot down some thoughts there. And again, I encourage people at the end of the webinar, the actions point, to kind of come back to this after you hear the kind of the tactical content that I provide, and hopefully you've got some actions to improve on as a firm or as a business. Cool. So it's been a couple minutes. So if you're still working on that, feel free to continue. If you're done, we'll kind of move on. So I'm now going to go to an in-product application. So as I mentioned, it's not going to be like a end-to-end. Here's how you create your forecast and all the nuts and bolts. If you want a demo, reach out. You can get a demo separately. It's going to be more kind of specific around how you can use this in a client meeting or how you can use it in an internal board meeting to help make decisions, just as a example. And then we'll go into a couple tactics, and then we'll end with kind of actions and some takeaways. But when I'm in product, I want you to think about the specific scenarios that you just thought of, or specific client scenarios, and then how you think it might be able to, to help or not help, or how you'd maybe do that as a firm or as a business, whether that's kind of on Fathom or not on Fathom. So let me just jump into the product. Cool. So I'm just going to use this Cape Town Coffee Roasters company. So I'm going to jump into my forecast. Again, there's a bunch of ways you can spin this up. Don't worry too much about the details of it just now. It's a little bit bigger. So the business roadmap is basically an aggregation of the underlying data in the forecast that you've created here with what we call micro forecasts. Now, these are really, really important, because without a micro forecast, you can't get to the business roadmap. And a scenario, you can do kind of different scenarios, but the micro forecasts really bring them to life. So I'm going to start off by just explaining what micro forecast is, give you an example or two, and then show you how you can combine that in a scenario with your business roadmap. And finally, I'll jump into a report, because I think whilst it's great to show some of this online, if you're producing a PDF report for your stakeholders, a fan chart using forecasting is really, really beneficial. So if I jump into micro forecasts. So here you can see a few examples that I've already created. You can create these from scratch as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in that regard. But again, we're not going to go through too many nuts and bolts today. But if I jump into this new barista hire that I'm modeling out for April 2023, I can see the sales that I'm expecting them to get. This is in the rand, so that's why the kind of numbers looking pretty big for anyone on the UK on the call. And then direct wages here. So I'm saying, how much we're going to pay them. There's a motor vehicle expense here associated with them. Where's that coming from? Any VAT that we have configured. So you can see on an individual basis the kind of net cash flow that it comes with this specific hire, and therefore any profitability that comes with that as well. This is just one example. You can do this with any kind of modeling that you want to do, but the benefit of having it as a micro forecast is you can turn it off or on, and you can add it to different scenarios and kind of do sensitivity analysis to see when is the best time in the year, in the quarter, or whatever the case may be, next year, the year after, to hire this new barista. And that's really where it comes in. But again, if you want to add accounts here, you can customize all of this to show exactly what you want to show. And then there's different kind of charts and stuff you can have in here as well. So that's just like a really quick snippet of a micro forecast. So I've got staff ones here, I've got some capital ones here, investment and a dividend, got a couple of marketing campaigns here as well, a couple of asset related ones, and a random revenue one that I'll definitely turn off, because that was definitely a test that you can create here. And then we've got scenarios. So I'm going to explain scenarios briefly as well, and then you'll see the output, and hopefully those kind of two really quick building blocks will help paint the picture a little bit more in terms of the forecast roadmap. So I've created a few scenarios, and whenever you create a scenario, you can use another scenario as its basis, and you can add like baseline configurations. So you go in a lot of detail on this in the main forecast when you first create it, and you can kind of get as customized as you want, essentially. What we're doing here is applying a broad brush approach to categories, whether that's kind of revenue, cost of sales, and expenses, an increase or decrease in like the currency you're using, and your percentage, and you stipulate that in here. So for instance, the best case may just be an increase of 20% in revenue, for instance, and then that everything else will remain the same. So that's one option here, which you can use in conjunction with the second, which is applying micro forecasts. So I just went into New Barista and showed you how that looks from a micro forecast perspective. But what this does is it lets you select specific micro forecasts for this scenario. And then whenever you create the scenario, it will spin up, and it'll be one of the ones here. So I've got a few examples here already. So best case, investment secured, random, 3 times new highs, etc., etc. So you can obviously use the main grid to go between this, and this is where you can get into all the detail that if you used Fathom before, you know how you can kind of project this forward as a value rule, and you can kind of change the cash timing profile, and there's also tax settings and settings as well. So you can get a lot of the intricacies here. But the main focus for the webinar today is the business roadmap. So here, what we have is we don't have a scenario selected. So this is the main forecast. And what we've got is a list of all of the micro forecasts that are active in this current scenario, or the main case. If you want to turn any offer on, you can do that here as well. So you can customize the micro forecasts that are appearing. But the main couple of things I just want to highlight here is the quick metrics at the bottom will still take the underlying data. So whilst you can't see the underlying data here for the forecast, it will remain where it is. And if I just maybe I'll move this dividend around, so maybe say, well, can we afford that in March? Let me pull it forward. It looks like it has quite a negative impact on net cash flow, although there is cash on hand to kind of reserves in the bank, so maybe you can consider that. And you can start to play around to see when the best time to pay this dividend is. You'll notice that there's color coding here as well. That's dependent on the thresholds that we set. And different scenarios will have different micro forecasts. If I go up here, I'll just minimize that for now. If I go up here and go to best case, we'll see the best case has a few different scenarios that are there, and you can also then see the different net cash flow, change in cash, etc. So there's a few that you can do. There's unlimited scenarios that you can kind of create in the software, but a few that are quite interesting is like debt is 2+ months late. So if you want to see what impact that has on the kind of net cash flow, you can see that if you hit X. You can see what impact that has, if any major impact. You can also go into 3 new hires. This one just has those 3 hires and nothing else. So again, if you're in a board meeting here and the action item is HR or hiring plans for Q1 next year, you can advise the client or advise your kind of board members and stakeholders. You know, this is the impact that it has. If we do just these 3 hires, the impact on whatever metric you've selected here is X, Y, or Z. And that's a really important one to do, because it's great to have a forecast and say, yeah, here's a table, but sometimes just dragging and dropping this kind of brings it to life a little bit more. And if you combine these micro forecasts in a way that kind of paints a bit of a narrative, it's a lot easier for people to then kind of understand what you're trying to do with the data and the numbers behind the advice. So the other thing that you can do here is click directly into the micro forecast. So if we just go back to the main one here. So if I want to look at maybe this additional coffee machine, I'm actually like, what was that? I forget, you know, the workings behind it. You obviously hover over the main one, it will show the impact it has in terms of the cash. But if I drill down into it, I can see exactly what we did model out. And again, if you want to change any assumptions here, you can do so, and you can get into the detail about exactly what accounts you're adding and all that sort of thing. So if there's anything that's missing from a micro forecast, you can obviously add that over time. So in terms of actually delivering this advice, again, quite a powerful way, particularly if you're doing it for sensitivity analysis for a specific micro forecast, is online, because you can drag and drop and see in real time at the bottom here the impact it has on your kind of primary metric and other quick metrics as well if you expand that out. Another option is doing it within a report itself. So if I just jump into reports, I'll show you the ability to have different scenarios as well as adding a business roadmap. So I'll use one of the kind of template ones that we have. So if I hop down and add a new section. So if I just want to add a roadmap, you can do so. Just go into charts and you go to your forecasting at the bottom here, and the business roadmap, that's the first option. So here, if I go into edit, you can select the timeline. So it would be done on financial years. So it's actually next financial year or custom range or something. What are we expecting to happen? Okay, staff hires already happened, summer campaigns already happened, but all these other ones are happening on kind of the associated month up here. You can pick the the scenarios. Again, you could have different pages perhaps that say, you know, best case, worst case, main forecast, and everyone can see clearly in like a PDF pack, whether that's online or actually kind of printed off, the difference in the scenarios in terms of those different micro forecasts. So if you change this to best case perhaps, or maybe worst case, and hit apply, about micro forecast, that's a good start. 3 new highs, maybe. There we go. And you can also show specific categories. So we have up to 50 micro forecasts. If I go to best case, for instance, maybe this is a little bit busy because maybe we get a bit trigger happy and we have kind of 40 different ones here. You can say, actually, I just want to see marketing ones. And this is also helpful depending on how you kind of productize your offering. You might want a certain client or like a certain stakeholder to have only a little bit of information that's applicable to them. So here, for instance, you could remove the primary quick metric and just show them the current plan for like that stakeholder and a few KPIs relevant to them, which might not be kind of sensitive information, which you might not want sharing with such a broad team in terms of some of those like business unit directors and stuff. You can do this. You can also duplicate this and quickly change it. So maybe you want it to be like the 3rd financial year here. There's nothing there. So we do current financial year. There we go. So you can reorder this to be in that logical order if you want to. So again, there's different ways to chop up the business roadmap in a PDF. Something I think that is kind of adjacent to the business roadmap is also the scenarios. And this is where the fan chart comes in really, really handy. So if I go to charts, again, back to forecasting, it's already there because I picked it before, but it's at the bottom here. You can pick anything. So I pick cash on hand, perhaps. So we've got the actuals to date, which is November, and then we've got 3 different forecasts happening. So it's clear that the worst case is actually the worst case, best case is it's the best case, but everything's trending down in general. So that might, you know, warrant a discussion point. When I go into edit, I can change the date range to be custom range. And if we're being very kind of forecasting specific, maybe we just want the prior 3 months, and let's add in, you know, maybe the next 16 or so. And at the top here, you can add or remove different series. So again, you can only have 6 in a chart, but you can have a bunch in forecasting itself. So I pick a couple of these here. Maybe pick budget as well, just for comparison. Hit done. You can now see what the budget figures are. It looks like the 3 times new hires and main forecast and the worst case are all beneath budget. Whereas best case is beneath, but then jumps up in October. So something obviously happens there, which is great. And investment secured gets that jumping up in July. So you start to have some of these discussions with your key stakeholders. And I just picked cash on hand as an example, but let's say you wanted to see the exact same chart, but with a different metric. You just change that at the top here. So maybe you want to look at, let's pick revenue, for instance. You can apply that and then see revenue and any other kind of one you want. So there's a bunch of different ways to chop it up, but I think it's really beneficial to showcase the different options because it triggers a bit of a different discussion. It's not just like, yeah, that's what happened previously. Great. It's like, you know, what actions are coming from this meeting? How do we kind of kick on to the next stage of growth or whatever the next kind of objective is as a business? I think that's really important to showcase. So again, you can do that as a business roadmap online, business roadmap in the reports itself, as well as this fan chart, which visualizes it in a bit of a different way. So you might have your own kind of personal preference, and your stakeholders might also have their personal preference of how they like to digest that data. In terms of obviously delivering it, just like any standard Fathom report, downloading the PDF or send off. So again, not going to go into a bunch of detail. If you want more producty stuff on that, just let me know. There'll be more contact details towards the end of the webinar. But just wanted to show you how you can actually use a platform like Fathom specifically for scenario planning and planning those different micro forecasts to see when the best time to do X, Y, or Z is. Got a question here on a dividend, so I'll deal with that before we get to the tactics. Is the personal tax position of the person receiving the dividend considered, e.g. which tax year it falls in? It was only looking from a company perspective. Good question. It's just looking at it from a company perspective. I would suspect that the person receiving the dividend would obviously want to time that. So they may actually say, well, it should be in this tax year or whatever. This is looking from the company perspective. So no kind of like personal elements will come into it. But again, that's part of the discussion I suspect will happen when you start to plan some of these scenarios. When's the best time for the company to pay it, but also when does the person want to receive it? So that's the kind of back and forth discussion that you can have. Is there any other questions? Do send them through. So now I'm just going to go through a couple of the tactics, then we'll reflect with some actions, kind of tying back to the reflection that we did earlier, and there'll be a quick poll at the end as well. But again, keep the questions coming in if you continue to have any. So tactic one. So I'm a big believer in doing things kind of step by step. I think the big bang approach of like everything's now there never really works with anything, whether that's kind of implementing tech or just a new service offering or anything. I always use this analogy of building a house. You have to start with the foundation, wait for that to set, slowly build up. You're never going to have a house all built within half a day, and if you do, it's probably going to fall over. So you want to make sure that you do things in a logical way. So the first tactic that I would have is, again, as we did in the reflection for that one individual client or your kind of business with those 3 scenarios, sketch out potential plans for like the next 12 months. So you can obviously go further in the future, you can keep it shorter. It depends how far you want to go into the future, but I think 12 months is a pretty good starting point here. And then create micro forecasts from that. So even if it's not necessarily in Fathom directly at the start, think about, okay, what different things can happen in the next 12 months that I want to be aware of. So again, a few examples would be hiring staff. Unfortunately, a few examples are also laying off staff. Maybe it's going to be raising capital. Maybe it's going to be getting a loan from the bank. All of these you can kind of model out and then think, all right, what combination should I put together here to provide quite a holistic forecast? And then again, if you are already using us, or if you kind of move to use us, you can actually create those in the software, model that out, and have those different scenarios. You can clearly visualize that data for the stakeholders rather than just, hey, here's like a wall of numbers. If they're not numbers orientated, it might be kind of tricky for them to wrap their head around it. So tactic number 2 is what I actually did in the in-product kind of application, is obviously combine those different micro forecasts with baseline assumptions into scenarios. So again, there's nothing like wrong with it, but I think if you just say, hey, here's your revenue, you're going to increase it 3% month on month forevermore, like it's probably not going to quite be like that. There's probably going to be more things that pop up, like a bunch of things change, like the supply chain issues at the minute that could change something. If someone leaves, that could change something. Price increase, for instance, could change something. So I think having a lot of different options here is quite valuable. You obviously have to trade off that time investment with the output. You can kind of get overwhelmed with a bunch of different options and go into crazy amounts of detail, which might not be the best return on investment of time. But really consider having these baseline assumptions with those micro forecasts into scenarios. Because I think particularly anyone who is using Fathom at the minute with forecasting, if you're not doing this, I really suggest you do, because you get a lot of value out of the software from that, and hopefully your clients and your kind of key stakeholders like the board will get value from it as well. So it's actually more a delivery point. So different firms and different businesses have different way of doing it, but we've seen different approaches to varying degrees of success. So obviously the PDF reporting I touched on today, you can include all of it in a PDF report, which is then a holistic actuals plus forward-looking view. And I think even if you're not quite using Fathom at the moment, I think any report that you do, whether that's like Excel or core accounting software, should combine the both so that the stakeholder receiving it can see what's happened, the current position, and what could happen going forward, again, ideally with these scenarios. Some people use Loom videos, which I think is a great tool, particularly if you're doing this at scale. So I think it's probably less applicable to kind of in-house accountants, probably slightly more applicable to in practice. But if you're sending just like a report, you might want to add a little bit of context. Of course, you can do that in the text, but some people prefer just to listen to a quick kind of 4 or 5 minute video. So you can go over, this is why I grouped those micro forecasts together, or this is the impact that it has. This is my suggestion, or what do you think about X, Y, or Z? So again, back to the question we had about the kind of personal tax implications of a dividend, maybe that's something that you can address on the Loom, and then during your next meeting or during a phone call the next day, whatever the case may be, you can discuss that. Or maybe they send a Loom back and you kind of work async, which is a bit more of a scalable way to deliver some of this advice perhaps. And obviously there's the online view, which I think is really, really helpful for the sensitivity analysis and there's the kind of toggle between scenarios really quickly in a dynamic fashion, which if you're face to face with someone in a meeting or whether you're kind of conducting one of these meetings over Zoom, for instance, or Teams, that's quite a nice way to show the different impacts, live basically. And if they say actually the price increase is going to be 3%, not 2%, you can quickly change that in the software and you can see in real time the impact that that has on their finances. And again, I'd tie all this back to scenarios if you can, because that really helps bring some of these business decisions to life and brings a bit of life to the discussions happening at these board meetings. Tactic 4. So again, if you're in-house, it'd be a little bit different here. You're probably just looking for like positive feedback. So I think if you create a forecast and everyone's like, yeah, like whatever, then you can probably try and work on the impactfulness of that forecast, but also you don't invest a bunch of time in creating everything if the feedback is quite like muted. So I think kind of get that feedback from your stakeholders, because at the end of the day you need them to buy into it. Otherwise, again, the ROI and your time isn't going to quite stack up. If you're an accountant in practice, again, the same thing applies, but obviously the stakeholder is a client who's paying you for the service. So again, you can start to get that feedback from them and ultimately get an actual kind of marketing testimonial that you can then use back at your top of funnel to help market the service. Not everyone will kind of want a forecast. I think quite a lot of people probably need them, but if they don't want them, you can't force them to have it. But I think having them aware that you have that as an option as a service is really really important. So again, think of this as like a flywheel. So you kind of do the work, happy client, happy stakeholder. What's the feedback? Okay, let's put that back top of funnel and iterate on the next forecast for them, or try and attract more people through the savings and strategic help that you've given a particular client. And actions. Cool. So I'm going to spring up an end of webinar poll just to see if you found it useful and if you like the webinar format. If you don't, be very candid. But again, really, really keen for people to take actions from this, because I think you're kind of carving out half an hour to 45 minutes of your time. Time is precious, time is money. So hopefully something has resonated today. And if it has, I really encourage you to write down an action and have a time on that or a date on that on when you're going to try and achieve that by, and who else might potentially need to be involved and try and basically up your forecasting game. So I'm just going to launch this end of webinar poll. So that will appear in your Zoom shortly. Please answer it if you're so inclined. If there's any questions, send those through as well. Keep writing the actions. Hopefully you're semi-inspired by Leonardo da Vinci there. I'm just going to move on to the final slide, which is my contact details. So again, if there's any long form feedback or any questions that you have on this, please do let me know. More than happy to jump on calls with people or direct you to the most relevant person on Fathom side as well if there's something else you want to discuss product related. Question in from James: will the recording be available? 100%. So a recording will be available for this webinar. There's also a practical PDF that everyone who's registered will receive with like a checklist and kind of some of the main points that I've mentioned today. Not entirely sure when it will be available. It might be later on this week or it might be early next. Leave that with me. But if you don't have it in a week's time, just message me or message anyone at Fathom or the support team, and they'll give me a nudge internally to make sure that you receive both the recording and the PDF. Cool. So I'm going to wait for a minute or two just in case there's any other questions. But if not, thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully you found that useful. It looks like the people who've answered the poll have, which is awesome. And yeah, if you're joining me for the next couple of webinars, I look forward to seeing you then.